He was old, alone, and tired of life, until he found a tiny golden retriever puppy half drowned by the lake. That puppy, later named Theo, became his reason to live. Elias nursed him back to life, only to face something no one expected. A man came claiming to own the dog, and not long after, Elias's home was set on fire. Theo saved Elias, but lost his own life in the flames. Now, weeks later, another cruel scene. A mother dog and 3 puppies found drowning in the same lake. Tied, left to die. Could this be the same person who took Theo from the world? What comes next is not just a search for truth, it's a fight for justice. The sky over Larchwood Lake was a somber gray, with low-hanging clouds draping the water in a hushed, breathless chill. Near the southern inlet, where the cattails swayed like brittle ghosts, something small shifted among the weeds. A low, desperate whimper sliced through the silence. Harper Quinn knelt beside the lake's muddy edge, rain soaking the cuffs of her jeans. Her breath caught as her eyes fell upon the broken shape before her. A skinny golden retriever mother, curled tightly around 2 tiny puppies. All 3 were soaked to the bone, their fur slick and matted with dirt and frost. The mother's body trembled with exhaustion, but she refused to move, shielding her puppies from the wind as best she could. Harper, 35 years old, with cropped chestnut brown hair and sun-warmed skin, had never grown numb to suffering, no matter how many rescue scenes she'd witnessed. Her high cheekbones and serious gaze often intimidated those unfamiliar with her work, but beneath that hardened look was a woman deeply marked by empathy. A former investigative journalist from Denver, Harper had walked away from mainstream media after a botched shelter corruption scandal left several animals dead. She had since turned to grassroots rescue efforts, using her camera not to report, but to expose and protect. "I'm right here," she whispered to the mother dog. "You're not alone anymore." Carefully, Harper peeled off her jacket and wrapped it around the trembling trio. She could feel the smaller pup's heart fluttering wildly against her fingers, barely stronger than a moth's wing beat. Without wasting time, she pulled out her phone and sent a message. "Golden Retriever Mom, plus 2 pups found near Larchwood Lake. Hypothermic. Need immediate help. H." The reply came swiftly. "Lucy Martin. Location pinned. Bringing backup. Is Elias close?" Harper paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. That name, Elias, carried weight. He was an older man, once a recluse, who had rescued a dying golden puppy from a frozen lake just a winter ago. The dog, named Theo, had become his entire world, until a firebombing, presumably retaliation from a dog trafficking ring, tore his life apart. Though Elias had survived, Theo hadn't. His story had quietly stirred hearts across the rescue network. Harper responded, "Southside, bring Elias. These dogs, it's like last year all over again." By the time the rusted red pickup appeared over the hill, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy. From the truck stepped Elias, now 68, his beard white and neatly trimmed, his posture hunched with age and grief. He wore a flannel jacket faded by time and boots caked in mud. His eyes, shadowed by the brim of his fishing cap, scanned the lake with calm intensity. Following close behind him was Lucy Martin, 29, a veterinary assistant with steady hands and a fierce heart. Her golden curls were tied back, and she carried a field medical bag across her chest. Lucy had once treated Theo when he was first rescued, and she had never forgotten the way Elias looked at the pup, as if trying to will life back into him. Since then, she had stayed close to Elias, checking in and helping rebuild the small life he'd been piecing back together. Harper met them near the reeds. They were just lying here, no struggle, no noise. It felt like they'd already given up. Elias knelt slowly beside the mother dog, his hand extended, palm up, letting her sniff. She didn't resist. She merely blinked at him with tired, cloudy eyes and let out a low sigh. "She's a fighter," he said quietly. Lucy bent down beside him, inspecting the pups. 4 weeks, maybe. One's malnourished. Muscles are underdeveloped, like they've been kept from moving much. There's frostbite on the ears, and the mother's milk's gone dry. Harper adjusted the jacket around the pups. "I named her Clementine. Just now. They needed something." Elias looked at the smaller puppy, who had barely stirred. "Do they have a place to go?" Harper shook her head. "Shelter's full. I can keep them for the night, but they don't belong in a kennel." Elias said nothing for a moment. He ran his hand across the pup's fur. soft, cold, still damp, despite Harper's effort to dry them. Then he looked up, something flickering in his eyes. Not fear, not sadness, but recognition. "I'll take them." Lucy glanced at him, surprised. "Elias?" He turned to her gently. "I won't let it happen again. Theo taught me what loyalty feels like, what it costs. These three, they deserve a real home." With Harper's help, they transferred the dogs into the truck, wrapped in blankets and nestled in a carrier lined with heat packs. As they drove back to Elias's small cabin, a structure donated by a retired ranger friend, Harper followed behind them in her Subaru, unable to shake the eerie similarity to last year's case. By nightfall, Clementine and her puppies lay curled in front of Elias's fireplace, bellies full of warm goat's milk formula. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar and stew. One of the pups, the larger of the two, had begun scooting toward the fire, eyes still shut but face relaxed. The smaller one clung close to its mother, who kept lifting her head in soft, shallow movements. Elias sat nearby, elbows on his knees, watching them with a strange tenderness. The glow from the fire cast long shadows across the room, highlighting the lines carved by time on his face. He reached into the drawer beside him and pulled out a small object, a silver tag. The name Theo was barely visible now, its edges dulled from rubbing against his palms. Harper, who had lingered to make sure they settled in, stood by the door, camera slung over her shoulder. "You sure you're ready for this again?" Elias didn't look up. "Maybe I'm not. But maybe they're the ones who are." The morning after the rescue, fog clung to the ground like a heavy memory refusing to lift. Elias stood on his cabin's porch, arms crossed against the early chill, his eyes fixed on the still shape sleeping near the hearth inside. Clementine, the exhausted mother dog, and her two puppies. The faint crackle of dying firewood reached him through the open window. It had been years since his home had held such life, yet an ache pressed beneath his ribs, one that neither warmth nor silence could soothe. He turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the trees thickened near Larchwood Lake. That place now bore a strange magnetic pull, a tug he could not ignore. A part of him had thought, hoped, that what happened to Theo had been a singular cruelty, a storm of coincidence and malice. But when Harper sent the photo the night before, the same eyes, the same soaked fur, the same terror etched into golden bodies, Elias knew something was repeating. The drive was short, but dragged like a procession. The ruts in the dirt road jostled the truck, but he didn't mind. In the passenger seat sat an old fishing satchel filled not with lures, but a flashlight, gloves, and a tin of ground chalk he'd once used to mark deer trails, the same satchel he had with him the day he found Theo. Theo had been no more than 6 months old, a golden retriever pup with ribs showing through his wet fur, barely breathing at the edge of Willow Lake. It was during one of Elias's solitary winter walks, something he did more often after his brother died from a long illness. Grief had carved Elias hollow, and that dog had filled him back in. He still remembered how Theo whimpered, not out of fear, but recognition, as if saying, "You too?" Now, a year later, Elias parked near the southern bank of Larchwood and spotted Harper standing beneath a cottonwood tree, arms wrapped tight across her chest. She wore a moss-colored jacket, mud-streaked at the hem, and a camera slung diagonally across her back. Her brown hair, still damp from the morning mist, curled at the edges of her jawline. "You came," she said, her voice low but steady. "I had to," Elias replied, stepping out and slinging the satchel over his shoulder. "You said it felt the same. I need to see it for myself." They walked together in silence, the damp earth squelching beneath their boots. A few yards from where Clementine had been found, Harper pointed to a flattened patch of reeds. "She was here. You can see where she curled up. The pups were wedged into her side." Elias crouched and traced his fingers along the trampled grass. "And this?" Harper nodded and moved closer to the edge of the lake, where the mud turned darker. "Look." Pressed faintly into the wet soil were boot prints, larger than hers, worn at the heel, and with a deep V-cut at the toe, clearly deliberate. Near them, Elias spotted something that made his stomach twist. A frayed blue collar strap, its plastic buckle cracked but still faintly recognizable. He picked it up carefully, brushing off the mud. "This is almost identical to the one Theo had when I found him." Harper knelt beside him. "That's what I was afraid of." The two looked at each other, the weight of their shared realization sinking like stones. This wasn't a one-time act of cruelty. It was a pattern, an echo. "We need to tell Lucy," Harper said, "and the police." "I'll call Officer Dana," Elias replied. Officer Dana Prescott had worked in the county for nearly 20 years. She was in her mid-40s, tall and solid, with short blonde hair often tucked under a patrol cap and eyes that held both empathy and weariness. After the fire that took Theo, she'd promised Elias that if any new lead emerged, she'd reopen the case. At the time, it felt like consolation. Now, it felt like the beginning of something real. By noon, Dana stood beside the lake, studying the evidence. Her uniform was splashed with mud, her notepad filled with quick, angular scribbles. "You're certain the collar matches?" she asked Elias. "Yes," he replied. "And the boot prints? They were deliberate. Whoever left that dog knew someone would find her." Dana's brow furrowed. "It's almost ritualistic, like they want someone to see what they've done, but not too late." Harper showed Dana the photos she had taken, of Clementine shivering, the collar, the terrain. Dana exhaled slowly. "I'll file for a case merge. Your old report, Elias, plus Harper's discovery. It's enough to reopen the investigation. I'll run this collar against the registry, and I want casts made of the prints. If this is the same person or people, we're not just talking animal cruelty. We're talking premeditated abuse, a serial pattern." As they walked back to their vehicles, Harper touched Elias's shoulder lightly. "Why did you keep the satchel?" He smiled faintly. "Habit. Or maybe hope. I brought it the day I found Theo. Figured it might help me find something again." Harper glanced toward the lake. "Looks like it did." Back at the cabin that night, Elias sat by the fire, the tin of chalk unopened on the table beside him. Clementine lay curled in a makeshift bed of quilts. One puppy had begun trying to climb her leg with clumsy paws, eyes still shut, but eager for warmth. Elias reached for the old fishing tag still hanging on the wall, engraved with a name that hadn't faded despite time. Theo. He held it between his palms, silent. In a quiet voice he said, "We're not done yet, are we?" The firelight danced along the cabin walls, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper secrets from the past. Harper sat cross-legged on the rug, her jacket folded neatly beside her, as Clementine dozed near the hearth. One of her puppies, Maple, as Elias had begun to call her, was curled up against Harper's calf, breathing in tiny staccato bursts. Elias leaned against the window frame, arms crossed, eyes watching the snow swirl outside like ash. The old man had changed since the day they met. No longer just the recluse of Fairhill, but a figure slowly piecing himself back together. Harper broke the silence. "There's something I didn't tell you." Elias looked at her, waiting. "I used to be an investigative reporter. Not big time, regional work mostly. 3 years ago I followed a lead about a suspected dog mill operation near the Wyoming border. They moved around a lot, changed names constantly, always one step ahead." She exhaled, her jaw tightening. "I got close. Too close. One night, I came home to find my apartment broken into. Laptop gone, phone smashed, a dead rabbit left on my pillow. I took it as a warning, and I walked away from journalism the next week." Elias didn't speak. He simply walked over to the small kitchen shelf, poured 2 cups of coffee from a rusted percolator, and handed her one. Harper took it with a faint nod, the steam fogging her glasses. "Do you think," she asked slowly, "that Theo and now Clementine were both victims of the same people?" "I think it's too precise to be coincidence," Elias murmured. "And I think whoever they are, they've made a mistake." Just then the door creaked open and Lucy stepped in, her cheeks flushed from the cold. A knit cap covered her dark curls and snowflakes clung to the wool. She was bundled in her usual oversized parka, a digital tablet clutched in one gloved hand. "I found something," she said, closing the door behind her. "One of our rescue volunteers sent me this just now." Lucy pulled up a shaky security cam video from a gas station a few miles east of Larchwood Lake. The footage, grainy but clear enough, showed a beat-up green pickup truck pulling into the lot at 2:17 a.m. A man stepped out, broad-shouldered, heavy-set, with a hood pulled over his head. The bed of the truck was covered in a grimy tarp. At one point, the man looked directly into the camera before ducking into the store. Elias froze. "I've seen that truck," he said, his voice low. "A few nights before my house was set on fire, it passed by twice, parked outside for a good hour once." Lucy rewound the video. "Here, look at the license plate. It's obscured, but part of it's still legible. JXM 8. "That's enough to run through county records," Harper said, already pulling out her phone. "I still have friends in the precinct." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to be back in this?" Harper smiled grimly. "I was never really out." As they worked into the night, Harper told them more about the whispers she'd heard in Wyoming of a handler known only as Crawford, a man infamous in backroom circles for breeding dogs until collapse, then discarding them like trash once their usefulness ran out. Rumors had it he relocated southward, disappearing for a year after a small fire burned down one of his barns during a state inspection raid. The fire was never investigated, resources were low, and no official owner ever came forward. Lucy added, "There's chatter on animal rescue forums, 3 separate abandoned litters in 3 counties this year alone, all near wooded lakes, all golden retrievers, all within 30 miles of Fairhill." Elias stood, pacing. What if this isn't about random cruelty? What if someone's deliberately using these lakes as dumping grounds, hoping the cold finishes what they started? Harper nodded. That would explain why they left them barely alive, just enough for exposure to do the rest, so they can wash their hands. Maple whimpered softly, stirring beside the fire. Elias moved to her side and gently stroked her ear. Her eyes were still crusted, but she no longer flinched at touch. She blinked once at him, then closed her eyes again. "She's lucky," Harper whispered. Elias didn't look up. "We weren't." The silence that followed was not heavy, but focused, like the eye of a storm before it returns. Lucy glanced at them both. "I've already messaged Dana. She's agreed to follow up on the plate number." "And the footage?" Harper asked. "She'll get it authenticated. If we're right, this ties back to your old investigation, Harper, and to whoever burned down Elias's home. This could be the break we've been waiting for." As the fire burned lower, Elias stood and retrieved a small worn wooden box from beneath his bookshelf. Inside were Theo's collar, a paw print mold from his first vet visit, and a photo. Elias, bearded and smiling awkwardly, with the young pup beside him licking his cheek. He placed the photo on the table next to Clementine and Maple. "I'm not chasing ghosts anymore," he said. "We bring them to light, and this time, no one walks away." The morning light was pale and cold as it filtered through the trees that lined the edge of Willow County's northern stretch. In the thin veil of mist, 3 patrol cars crept down a dirt path that hadn't seen regular traffic in years. The forest, skeletal in the late winter, stood silent, as though watching. At the end of the trail, tucked between brambles and leaning pine, stood a rotting wooden structure, half shack, half tent, held together by hope and rusted nails. Sergeant Beth Connors stepped out first. She was a lean, square-shouldered woman in her late 40s, with sun-lined skin and short auburn hair tucked under a beanie. Known for her no-nonsense approach and a reputation for cleaning up what others ignored, Beth had grown up in the nearby town of Ketteridge. Her brother had lost his dog in a suspected baiting ring years ago. She never forgot. Behind her came Harper Quinn, bundled in her thick green coat, notebook already in hand. A scar just beneath her right cheekbone, thin and white, hinted at the fire she'd walked through before. Next to her was Elias, wrapped in his heavy tan coat and scarf, boots still dusted with wood ash from the night before. Despite his age, Elias walked with surprising purpose now, his grief forged into quiet resolve. "Travis Mendel," Beth muttered as she approached the door. Age 42, white male, 6'2", history of assault, suspicion of illegal animal trade, and obstruction. Last known job was working maintenance at a scrapyard upstate. She glanced back at Harper. "He went off the grid 2 years ago, until your video." The wooden door creaked under her gloved hand. Inside, the air reeked of damp mildew, oil, and something older, like rot. The shack was cluttered with tattered blankets, beer cans, old dog bowls, and paper scraps. On one corner wall, a nailed-up sheet of plywood bore hooks, each one with a collar. Some still had tags, some had names. Elias approached slowly. His eyes fell on a small red collar with a broken buckle. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. Lucy had joined them a few minutes later, breathless from the hike in. She crouched near a box under a stained mattress and pulled out a rusted gasoline can and a brass-colored Zippo lighter etched with an eagle. "Same brand as the one recovered from the fire debris," she whispered, "and that gas can smells fresh." In a corner crate lay a stack of forged veterinary papers, several with crossed-out names and mismatched dog breeds. One file listed Theo with a fabricated adoption date. Harper stiffened when she read it. "This is it," she whispered. "This is our link." Beth motioned for the other officers to secure the site. A forensics team was called in. One officer found traces of dog fur, golden, matted, wedged behind a broken crate. Another uncovered receipts for meat, gloves, and industrial cleaner, all recent. By the time they had finished documenting the scene, a clear image had emerged. And Travis Mendel wasn't just a small-time dog abuser. He had been systematically dumping dogs, mothers and litters, across state lines, changing vehicles and identities like coats, the collars, the falsified documents, the gas can. It was all the blueprint of a man who never planned to be caught. That night, back at Harper's cabin, they gathered around the fireplace. Lucy sat cross-legged on the floor, scrolling through emails. Clementine lay asleep beside her, and her two pups nestled safely in the corner. The warmth of the fire did little to ease the tightening of Elias's jaw. Beth had stayed behind at the station, but before she left, she said something Elias hadn't expected. "You gave that dog a chance, Elias. You gave them a chance. But now it's your turn to finish what Theo started." Harper leaned toward Elias now. "You okay?" He nodded, but slowly. "I remember the night I found Theo," he said, voice gravelly. "He was just lying there on the lake ice like he'd accepted it. I thought he wouldn't even survive the hour. But he got up, and he changed everything." Harper said nothing, letting the silence speak. "There were nights," Elias went on, "when I thought I couldn't go on after he died. But now, I realize maybe he didn't die just to be mourned. Maybe he died to wake someone like me up." From the table, Lucy looked up. "We found the monster, Elias, but it's not over. He hasn't been caught yet." Harper added, "I've already sent a statement to my former editor. Once this goes public, he won't be able to hide. Not anymore." Suddenly Clementine stirred and let out a soft, protective growl. The cabin fell quiet. Outside, through the frost-covered window, headlights blinked in the dark woods, just for a moment, before disappearing again. The morning fog hadn't yet lifted from the town of Fairhill when the sheriff's office announced the arrest. Travis Mendel, 42 years old, white male, 6'2", with a long history of animal abuse and suspicion of arson, was finally in custody. The news spread like wildfire, igniting both fury and relief across the local rescue community. Harper Quinn stood in the viewing room, her arms crossed tight over her chest, watching the live interrogation unfold through the one-way glass. She looked as tired as she was determined, her short brown hair tucked behind her ears, cheekbones sharp under the dim light. She had seen monsters before in her time as a reporter, but Travis had the kind of rot that soaked into every word he spoke. On the other side of the glass, Elias sat hunched in a chair, his weathered face partially hidden beneath his gray fishing cap. His hands trembled slightly, not from age this time, but from restraint. Sitting only a few feet away from the man who had taken Theo from him was like standing at the edge of a crumbling cliff. One breath, and you'd fall. Detective Sharon Mercer, a stocky black woman in her early 50s with clipped silver curls and no tolerance for theatrics, leaned over the table. Her voice was calm, precise. "Mr. Mendel, the evidence is no longer circumstantial. We have video footage, tags, witness statements, and the DNA results from the burned cabin. You can either talk, or we can hand everything over to the DA with a full recommendation for maximum sentencing." Travis looked older than his years, his skin patchy from sun damage, and a thick reddish beard clung unevenly to his chin. A long white scar traced from his jawline up to his temple, crossing a left eye that seemed permanently narrowed. He leaned back, dragging the cuffs across the table with a screech. "You want the story?" he muttered. "Fine, I'll give you the damn story." 2 years earlier, Travis had been part of an underground network selling animals for backyard breeders. Theo, then a tiny golden retriever pup, was one of several stolen litters trafficked across state lines. But Theo was different. He was quiet, too alert, like he understood something wasn't right. Travis didn't like the way the pup looked at him. He didn't bark, didn't whimper, just stared, Travis said, tapping the table like it might jog his memory. I figured something was off. Then I found out he'd gotten loose, probably during a transfer run. Didn't care at the time, but then... He glanced at Detective Mercer, then at the camera in the corner. Then I saw a post online, this old man pulling a half-frozen pup from the lake, that damn dog, Theo, and people loved it. News articles, photos, all this praise. That's when I knew it was him. Travis's eyes narrowed. He got attention. People started sniffing around. The dog had a scar, same spot. Someone was going to figure it out. So I waited, found the guy's place. Thought a little fire would send a message. Elias flinched in his seat behind the glass. Harper stood still, face pale. She whispered, "He knew." Travis kept talking. I watched the place for weeks. I saw the old man walking that mutt like it was a damn prince. Then one night, I brought gas and a match. Thought he'd be out fishing. But he was home. Lucky old bastard got pulled out in time. After hours of questioning, Travis confessed to more. The dumping of the golden retriever mother and her 3 puppies by Willow Lake just 10 days earlier. One puppy had already drowned when hikers arrived. The others survived, barely. And the collars they wore? Identical to the one found on Theo the day Elias pulled him from the ice. He didn't mention remorse. He mentioned inconvenience. That night, Elias stood outside the veterinary clinic where the 2 surviving pups now slept beside their recovering mother. The wind carried a bitter chill. His fingers pressed gently against the glass as he watched the little bodies breathe, fragile but fighting. He didn't notice Harper until she spoke behind him. "I thought you'd want to know," she said softly. "They'll all make it." Elias didn't speak for a moment. Then he turned to her. "He said Theo never made a sound." Harper nodded. "He was like that," Elias whispered. "Never needed to. Just stayed close, watched the world, waited for people to do the right thing." Harper rested her hand on the glass. "And now?" Elias exhaled, voice cracked by cold and grief. "Now it's my turn." The day the article dropped, the town of Fairhill went quiet, then exploded. Harper Quinn, former investigative journalist turned reluctant rescuer, had spent 3 sleepless nights hunched over her laptop in her cramped living room. The screen's pale light cast shadows against her sunburnt cheekbones and tired hazel eyes. Her short brown hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and she hadn't changed out of her black hoodie in days. Every word she wrote felt like cutting into old scars, ones she had buried since the day she walked away from journalism after being threatened off a story too close to the truth. But this wasn't just a story anymore. This was Theo, and the lake, and the fire, and the whimpers of mother dogs too broken to bark. The headline read, "Sold for silence inside the hidden trade of America's abandoned dogs." At the heart of the piece was Travis Mendel, arrested, charged, exposed, but Harper made it clear. He was just a pawn in something bigger. A shadow network stretching across state lines, where unregistered litters were bred in filth and trafficked like contraband. Photos from the burned collars, testimony from survivors, and hidden GPS data tied it all together. Harper had one rule: name no victim, only monsters. The article went live at 9 a.m. By noon, it had been shared 68,000 times. At 3 p.m., the governor's office issued a statement. At 5 p.m., federal agents raided a property in northern Utah linked to one of Travis's known contacts. The operation took down 3 men, one of whom was caught with over a dozen sickly golden retriever pups crammed in a windowless trailer. In Fairhill, it felt as if the weight of years had cracked open. Meanwhile, Elias sat by the lake again. The ice had melted completely now. The sky reflected clear and soft across the ripples. The bench he sat on, once warped and half broken, had been replaced by volunteers from the local rescue group, a tribute to Theo's legacy. A simple plaque read, "For those who saw the world and chose to care." Elias wore the same dark green flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms, his pale skin spotted with age, arms lean from years of rowing. His snow-white beard had grown longer in recent weeks, and though his frame remained narrow and worn, something about him stood straighter now. He didn't want to be anyone's hero, but people started calling him that anyway. Lucy Mayer, now 28, had become the town's youngest and fiercest advocate for animal rights. With her long auburn curls and sharp gray eyes, Lucy had a kindness that could cut steel. She had once been a shy shelter volunteer. Now, she was fire. Lucy launched the Theo Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to rescuing, rehabilitating, and rehoming animals recovered from abusive situations. She hosted live streams from shelters, organized donation drives, and trained young volunteers in first response rescue. One night, she visited Elias. "Everyone wants you to speak at the memorial," she said gently, her boots crunching the gravel near his steps, "as Theo's guardian." Elias looked up from the tin mug of black coffee in his hands. His porch light flickered behind him, a halo of dust motes dancing in the dark. "I wasn't his guardian," he murmured. "He chose me." Lucy sat beside him. "Still, we thought you could be our honorary figure, like a symbol of the ones who stayed when it got hard." Elias smiled faintly. "You don't need a symbol. You need dogs fed. You need fences fixed. I can do that. But speeches, that's never been my kind of thing." She nodded. "Then be what you've always been. Steady, quiet, true." The fundraiser event was held in the Fairhill Community Center, where string lights wrapped around wooden beams and candle jars flickered beside framed portraits of rescued dogs. At the back of the room, Elias stood by the entrance. He wore a plain gray coat and dark jeans. He didn't say a word, but every passerby paused to thank him. Some touched his arm. Others nodded, tears in their eyes. At the center of the room stood a sculpture, bronze, full of quiet strength. A man kneeling in the snow, arms cradling a limp dog with eyes closed, their silhouettes wrapped in a blanket of wind. It was called The Last Light. A week after the event, Elias returned to his cabin with Harper beside him. The 3 new pups, the ones rescued near Willow Lake, were now playful and bright-eyed, their ribs no longer showing, their tails swishing in chaotic rhythm. Their mother, now named Clover, had begun to trust again. She rested beside the hearth, eyes half-lidded, knowing this home would never hurt her. "Clover's scars are fading," Harper observed, crouching to scratch the base of the dog's ear. "She doesn't flinch anymore." Elias nodded. "Neither do I." They sat together in silence, the crackling fire reflecting in their eyes. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and burnt coffee. Dust particles drifted through the beams of late-morning sunlight, cutting diagonally across the silent rows of observers. It was a federal building, stark and cold, nestled among the city towers of Salt Lake. But inside, everything felt warmer, not because of comfort, but because of something older, heavier, like the collective breath of people waiting for a wound to close. Travis Mendel sat in the defendant's chair, hands shackled, face unreadable. He was 42, with greasy dark blonde hair slicked back against a pale forehead, a jagged scar running from his left cheek to his ear like a twisted river. His beard was patchy, grown more from neglect than intention. In his dark suit, provided by a public defender, he looked like an ill-fitting version of civility, a shell of someone who once knew how to hide his cruelty. His steel blue eyes scanned the room, but they never settled on anyone. Or perhaps no one wanted to meet them. Elias stood in the second row. He hadn't worn anything new. Just his old dark gray flannel shirt tucked into faded jeans, sleeves rolled to his forearms. His boots still carried the memory of mud from the lake shore. His white beard was trimmed shorter now, but his eyes remained sunken with time and memory. In his hands, resting on his lap, was a small black and white photo in a wooden frame, weathered at the corners, but the image still sharp. Elias and Theo, side by side in the snow, both looking forward. Theo's ears were alert, tail raised in gentle pride. Elias's mouth was neither smiling nor frowning, just still. The judge, a tall black woman named Honorable Marcella Brink, late 50s with tightly pulled back silver hair and glasses perched on the edge of her nose, delivered the sentence with a voice that echoed like the closing of a steel gate. Travis Mendel, for the charges of multiple counts of aggravated animal cruelty, conspiracy in illegal breeding and distribution, attempted manslaughter through arson, and obstruction of justice, this court sentences you to 25 years in a federal penitentiary with no chance of parole before 15 years served. Gasps did not rise from the room. The silence remained intact, weightier than sound. As the gavel came down, Elias stood. He walked slowly, steadily, his boots striking the polished floor like a metronome of memory. When he reached the edge of the seating gallery, the bailiff moved to gesture him back, but Judge Brink raised a hand gently. "You may speak," she said, nodding once. Elias turned. The room watched him. He raised the photograph for a brief moment, not like a shield, but like a candle held high in the dark. Then he spoke. "You burned my home," he said, voice gravel in winter, but not what he gave me. He said no more. He returned to his seat, but the weight of his words hung in the room like smoke. Outside the courthouse, Harper waited by the steps. She wore a brown trench coat cinched at the waist, dark jeans tucked into rain boots, her short brunette hair tousled by the wind. A press badge hung from her neck, more symbol than necessity now. The national outlets were all over the story, but she didn't want the spotlight anymore. She wanted truth to stick. "They're going to pick up your quote," she told Elias. "Already got a guy from CNN asking me about it." Elias chuckled softly. "Let them. It's not mine to own." They stood in silence, watching as Travis was led into a white federal van, steel doors sliding shut behind him. No one cheered. No one clapped. The moment wasn't about triumph. It was about weight, finally shifting. That night, back at the cabin, Elias lit a small fire in the hearth. Clover, the rescued golden retriever mother, now healthier and visibly stronger, lay beside him. Her eyes followed his every movement, not with suspicion, but with something like shared memory. The three puppies, now named Ember, Birch, and Wren, chased each other in circles across the living room, knocking over a cushion or two as they squealed and yipped. Elias didn't stop them. He liked the noise now. He reached for the same framed photograph and placed it on the mantel. "I think he would have liked them," he murmured to Clover. She wagged her tail once, soft and sure. The next morning, Elias received a letter. It was from the warden of the county jail, an official note saying Travis had made a final statement before transport. It wasn't an apology, just a sentence scrawled on the back of a receipt. "That dog saw me. That was the worst of it." Elias read it once, then threw it into the fire. 2 weeks later, Lucy visited the cabin. She brought flyers, updates from the Theo Fund, and news that 5 more dogs had been rescued from a holding trailer in Nevada. Another string broken from the chain. "I want to name one of the new dogs after Theo," she said, her gray eyes shining. "Not to replace him, but to remember." Elias nodded. "Just make sure it's a good dog." Lucy laughed. "We'll find out." As she left, Ember jumped into her arms and licked her nose. "Yup," she said. "This one's a troublemaker." Spring in Willow Lake no longer smelled of smoke. The cabin stood once again where the fire had torn it down, rebuilt plank by patient plank. It was not identical to the old one. This new version was a little taller, with larger windows and a porch that wrapped halfway around the front. But inside, Elias had chosen to keep the familiar bones. The old kettle, still dented from a decades-past camping trip, hung on its usual hook. The same set of mugs, mismatched and chipped, lined the shelf. And on the wall above the fireplace, right where it had always been, hung a black and white photograph. Elias and Theo, standing shoulder to shoulder in the snow, both looking ahead into something only they seemed to understand. It had been 1 year. Elias now walked with a slight hitch in his step, not from age, but from the winter pneumonia he'd caught last December. A reminder that even the strong-willed must yield to time. His beard had grown longer again, thick and white like first frost. The lines around his eyes had deepened, but when he smiled, there was light there, a softened kind of strength. And always at his side was Ash. Ash was the smallest of Clover's litter, now just over a year old. His fur was a shimmering mix of cream and copper, soft to the touch and tangled around the ears. His eyes were amber, startlingly close to Theo's, which at first had unsettled Elias. But Ash was not a ghost. He was wild, exuberant, and clumsy, especially on the wooden floor where his paws often slid out from under him. He barked at dragonflies, chased shadows, and insisted on dragging sticks twice his size back to the porch, as if offering tributes. Yet, when Elias sat still, Ash would curl beside him without being called, head resting on Elias's foot, breathing in sync. The choice to keep Ash had not come immediately. The other two pups, Birch and Wren, had been adopted by families downstate. Clover, their mother, had been placed with a retired schoolteacher named June, who sent handwritten letters and photos of the golden matron lounging in the sun. Lucy had offered to help find a home for Ash as well, but Elias had shaken his head then, and again when she asked a week later. "I need a reason to leave the porch again," he had said simply. Lucy, now running the Theo Fund full-time, often visited on weekends. Her dark hair was tied up in a bun most days, and she always arrived with folders full of updates, grant proposals, and, lately, high school volunteers. She had blossomed into the kind of leader who wore hiking boots to donor meetings and took phone calls while knee-deep in a river rescue. Harper, too, had found footing again. After the explosive article that exposed the network of illegal breeders, she had been offered positions at major news outlets, but she turned them all down and chose instead to stay local, launching a podcast named Between the Pines. Her voice, calm, textured, and sharp, narrated forgotten stories of both people and animals across the region. One episode, titled Theo's Last Winter, had drawn millions of listens. But for Elias, the world had narrowed again, and he was content with that. Each morning he brewed his coffee on the stove, fed Ash, then walked the path down to the lake. The trees had grown back slowly, but tender greens now lined the trail. The lake itself reflected less memory now, and more sky, tranquil, blue, and unbothered. Ash always raced ahead, stopping only when Elias called. Sometimes, Elias brought the photo with him, wrapped in a flannel cloth, setting it on a stump by the water as he sat beside it. "You'd like this one," he murmured once to the air, glancing at Ash. "Stubborn, won't listen, but he's got good in him." One day in early June, Elias met someone new. A boy, no older than 10, stood near the trail by the lake, staring at the water. He was lanky, freckled, and wore a red hoodie with a tear in the elbow. A fishing pole leaned against his shoulder. He turned when Ash barked. "Hey," the boy said. "Cool dog." Elias approached, slow but open. "You fishin'?" "Trying to," the boy shrugged. "My mom works down at the diner, says I should stay out of trouble." Elias sat beside him. "Water's calm today." "Yeah." They sat for a while. Elias didn't ask questions. The boy didn't offer any more. But the next day, he was there again. And the next. By the end of the week, Elias had brought an extra sandwich and a tackle box with newer hooks. The boy's name was Mason. His father had left years ago. His mom, Carla, worked double shifts. Mason liked dogs, but couldn't have one. The landlord didn't allow them. Ash took to Mason instantly. He let the boy throw sticks, shared his chew toys, and even let him nap on the porch, head tucked under Mason's elbow. One afternoon, Lucy stopped by with a photographer from a regional newspaper. They were doing a story on the 1-year anniversary of the Willow Lake fire and the work of the Theo Fund. "I don't want the spotlight," Elias said. "You're not the story," Lucy replied. "Theo is, and Ash." The photographer, a quiet woman named Dana with silver earrings and worn boots, asked gently if she could take one portrait. Elias agreed, on one condition. The resulting photo was taken in black and white. Elias stood straight, one arm wrapped around Ash's chest, the other holding Ash's paw to his own heart. Both looked straight into the lens. Ash's ears were perked. Elias's eyes, steady and bright, spoke louder than his mouth ever could. The image later appeared on the front page under the headline, "From Ashes, a Legacy of Hope." Sometimes, God doesn't send angels with wings. He sends them with 4 paws, a scarred past, and eyes that still dare to trust. Theo didn't just survive. He led Elias, and all of us, back into the light. And maybe, just maybe, the next time you pass someone who walks a little slower, or a dog that waits by the roadside, you'll remember this story. You'll remember that miracles don't always thunder from the sky. Sometimes they shiver beside a frozen lake. Sometimes they bark at your door when your heart is closed. And sometimes they're born again. From Ash. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Leave a comment below. Tell us the name of the animal that changed your life. Hit subscribe to hear more true stories of healing, hope, and the quiet power of love. May God bless you and every soul you've ever helped, whether they walk on 2 legs or 4.